The first thing I noticed about him wasn't his shoulders, though God knows I noticed those too. It was the way he stood in the barn doorway with lightning cracking white behind him, rain sheeting off the brim of his hat, and said, in a voice low and rough like gravel under boots, "You gonna stand there and catch pneumonia, or you gonna come inside?" That was Wade Calloway. And I had no idea, soaked to the bone and shivering on a stranger's property in the middle of nowhere, Montana, that he was about to become the person I measured every single day of my life against. My name is Eli Marsh, and 3 hours before that lightning strike, I'd been driving home from a job interview I didn't get, in a car that had chosen the worst possible stretch of back road to die on. No cell signal, no street lights, just black fields on either side and rain coming down like the sky had a grudge against me personally. I'd walked almost 2 miles before I saw the porch light of the ranch house glowing gold through the storm, and by the time I reached it, my hands were shaking too hard to knock properly. He'd opened the door before I even got the chance. I want you to understand what he looked like in that doorway, because I've spent a long time since then trying to describe it to myself and never quite managing it. Tall, taller than me by a few inches, with the kind of build that came from actual labor, not a gym. Dark hair damp at the edges from having stepped out earlier to check on the horses. Eyes the color of strong coffee, steady in a way that made you feel, for just a second, like the storm outside didn't matter as much. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't smiling either. He just looked at me like a man deciding something, and then he stepped back and waved me in like it was nothing at all, like taking in a stranger off the road was just Tuesday for him. "The storm's not letting up till morning," he said, closing the door against the wind. "Phone lines are likely down too. You got someone waiting on you?" "No," I said, and it came out smaller than I meant it to. "No, there's no one." Something moved behind his eyes when I said that. I didn't understand it yet. I would later. He didn't put me up in the house that first night. Not out of unkindness, but because, as he explained with a kind of awkward formality, his father was staying over in the guest room and the man had opinions about strange men in the house after dark. So instead he walked me out to the barn, boots splashing through the mud, and set me up in the loft with 3 thick wool blankets and an old kerosene lamp that threw amber light across hay bales and coiled rope and the smell of horse and leather that I would come, eventually, to think of as the smell of safety. "It ain't much," he said, standing at the base of the ladder, rain still dripping off him, "but it's dry, and Duchess and Bandit down there'll keep you warmer than you'd think." "Thank you," I said. "Really, you didn't have to do any of this." He looked at me for a long moment then, longer than a stranger usually looks at another stranger. "Man doesn't leave somebody out in weather like this," he said finally. "Get some sleep. I'll bring you coffee at first light." He kept that promise. That was the thing about Wade I learned fastest and never once had reason to unlearn. He kept every promise he made, no matter how small. I didn't sleep much that first night, not because the loft was uncomfortable, but because I kept replaying the way he'd looked at me in the doorway, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out why my chest felt tight every time I did. I told myself it was just gratitude, relief, the kind of adrenaline crash that comes after a scary night. I was 23 years old, and I had spent every one of those years being very, very careful about which feelings I let myself examine too closely, and this felt like exactly the kind of feeling I wasn't supposed to examine. Morning came gray and washed clean, the storm finally spent, and true to his word, Wade climbed the loft ladder with 2 tin mugs of coffee balanced with more care than the situation probably required. He sat down across from me on a hay bale, close enough that our knees nearly touched, and for a moment neither of us said anything at all. The horses shifted below us. Somewhere outside a rooster was making a fool of itself. "Car trouble, huh?" he said eventually. "Something like that. Timing belt, I think. Or the alternator. I'm not exactly a mechanic." He almost smiled at that, the corner of his mouth twitching in a way that undid something in my stomach I didn't have a name for yet. "I can take a look at it. Got some tools. Might take me the better part of the day, though, depending on what's wrong." "You don't have to, Eli." My name in his mouth for the first time. I felt it land somewhere under my ribs. I said I would. "Drink your coffee." I drank my coffee. That was supposed to be the whole story. A stranded traveler, a fixed car, a thank you and a goodbye. That's not what happened. What happened was that his father's truck, parked in the yard, wouldn't be leaving until the roads dried out properly, which took 2 more days. What happened was that Wade's spare part order for my car took 4 days to arrive from town. What happened was that somewhere between the first cup of coffee and the sixth, between watching him work shirtless under the hood of my dead Honda with sweat cutting clean lines down his back, between him teaching me, badly, patiently, how to muck a stall without gagging, between long silent evenings on his porch where the quiet never once felt uncomfortable, I stopped counting the days like a burden and started dreading the day my car would finally start. I remember exactly when I understood I was in trouble. It was the third evening, and we were sitting on the porch steps with our shoulders almost touching, watching the sun bleed orange and pink across land that seemed to stretch on forever. He'd been quiet for a while, turning his coffee mug slowly in his hands, and then he said, without looking at me, "Can't remember the last time I sat out here with someone and didn't feel like I had to fill up the silence. Is that a compliment? It's Wade for, I like having you around." He glanced sideways at me then, and the look on his face, open, a little unguarded, a little scared of being that open, made my heart do something violent and unfamiliar in my chest. "Didn't figure you'd need translating. But you strike me as the type that likes things spelled out." I admitted, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "Spell it out for me sometime, whatever it is." He didn't answer that. Not that night. But his knee pressed a little more firmly against mine, and neither of us moved away, and we sat there until the stars came out fully and the temperature dropped enough that our arms brushed every time either of us breathed too deep. I went to bed that night with my heart racing and no earthly idea what to do about it. And somewhere in that barn loft, staring up at rafters silvered with moonlight through the gaps in the boards, I finally let myself think the sentence I'd been avoiding for 3 days straight. I think I'm falling for him. I think I'm falling for a cowboy who doesn't even know my last name yet, and I have absolutely no idea what that means for either of us. I want to pause here before I go further, because I know some of you are already bracing for heartbreak, and I promise you, this story earns its ending. But it doesn't get there easily. Wade and I had 5 more days before my car was fixed, and every single one of them cracked something open in me that I'd kept locked for years. And on the 6th day, everything nearly fell apart before it had the chance to become anything at all. The 4th morning, I woke to the smell of bacon drifting up through the loft boards, which was new. Wade usually left me to wake on my own before bringing coffee up. I climbed down to find him at the small propane stove he kept rigged in the tack room, an old cast iron pan hissing in his hands, and something in the set of his shoulders told me he'd been up a while already, thinking about something. "Didn't figure you for a cook," I said, leaning in the doorway. "Don't get used to it. Special occasion." He didn't turn around, but I caught the edge of a smile in his voice. "Dad's heading out this morning. Road's cleared enough. That's good news, right? Means my car's closer to fix too." He was quiet for a second too long. "Yeah," he said finally. "Guess it does." I didn't understand yet what that pause meant. I understand it now, the way a man can want 2 things that cancel each other out. Can want you gone because you don't belong there and want you to stay because some part of him has already decided you do. His father left before noon, a weathered, quiet man who shook my hand firmly and studied me a beat longer than strictly necessary before climbing into his truck. When the dust from his tires had settled on the drive, Wade let out a breath I hadn't noticed him holding, like the whole house had exhaled. "He's not a bad man," Wade said, watching the empty road. "Just old-fashioned about some things. Easier when it's just," he stopped himself. "Just you," I finished. "Yeah." He looked at me sideways. "Guess I got used to that pretty quick, before you showed up soaked and half-drowned on my porch. Sorry to ruin your solitude." "You didn't ruin anything." His voice dropped lower, more careful, like he was handling something breakable. "That's the thing I can't figure out how to say right. I wanted him to try. God, I wanted him to try. But he turned back toward the barn instead, told me Bandit needed exercising, and the moment folded itself away like it had never happened at all. That became a pattern with Wade. These openings, these doors he'd crack just wide enough for me to see light through, before something in him pulled them shut again. I told myself I understood. A man alone on land this remote, this used to keeping his own counsel, wasn't going to hand his heart over easy. I told myself I could be patient. I was not, it turned out, very good at being patient. That afternoon he taught me to ride. Not well. Bandit was a patient old gelding who mostly tolerated my clumsiness, but well enough that by the third loop around the paddock I wasn't gripping the saddle horn like my life depended on it. Wade walked alongside, one hand resting light against my calf to correct my posture, and every single time he touched me I felt it travel straight up through my chest and settle somewhere near my heart, warm and unbearable. "You're overthinking it," he said, the fourth time I tensed wrong going into a turn. "Horse can feel you thinking. Just trust him." Easy for you to say. You've probably been doing this since you could walk. Since before that, probably. He glanced up at me, and the late sun caught his eyes in a way that made them look almost gold instead of brown. "My old man put me on a horse before I had good sense. Guess some things you just don't forget how to do." Is that a metaphor? Might be. The corner of his mouth did that thing again. That almost smile that undid me every time. "Are you planning on sticking around long enough to find out?" My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I was half convinced Bandit could feel it too. "My car's supposed to be done tomorrow," I said, and I heard how much I didn't want that to be true even as I said it. Something shifted in Wade's face. Quick, there and gone, like a cloud passing over the sun. "Right," he said. "Tomorrow." He didn't say anything else the rest of the ride, and I spent every silent minute of it trying to work out what I'd said wrong. Whether I'd imagined the whole conversation, whether wanting things this badly from a man I'd known 4 days made me a fool, or just desperately, achingly lonely in a way I hadn't let myself admit until a stranger with kind eyes pulled me in out of the rain. That night, we sat on the porch again, same as every night, except the silence between us felt different. Charged. The air before a storm rather than the calm after one. Wade had a bottle of beer he wasn't really drinking, turning it slowly by the neck, and I had my knees pulled up to my chest like I could make myself smaller, safer, less obvious. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally, because the quiet had gotten unbearable. "Go on. Why'd you let me stay? That first night. You didn't know me. Could have called someone, driven me to a motel in town. Anything. Why the barn? Why the coffee every morning? Why any of it?" Wade was quiet long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer at all. When he did, his voice had gone rough in a way I hadn't heard from him yet. "Because you looked like you needed somewhere to land," he said. And because he stopped, jaw working like he was chewing on the rest of the sentence, deciding whether it was safe to let out. "Because?" I pushed gentler than I felt. He turned to look at me fully then, and the porch light caught half his face in gold and left the other half in shadow, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw something raw and unguarded sitting right there in his eyes, no doors shutting on it this time. "Because the second I saw you standing in that doorway," he said low, something in me sat up and paid attention in a way it hasn't done in a long time. Longer than I want to admit to, and I've spent every day since trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with that. Because it scares the hell out of me, Eli, and I don't scare easy. The air between us had gone thin and electric. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. "What are you scared of?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "That you're leaving tomorrow," he said. "And that I already know I'm going to spend a long time wishing you hadn't." Neither of us moved for what felt like a full minute. His eyes dropped, just briefly, to my mouth, and mine did the same to his, and the space between us on that porch step had somehow, without either of us deciding it, shrunk down to almost nothing. I could feel the warmth coming off him. I could hear the catch in his breath. And then, from somewhere out in the dark fields, a coyote howled, long and sharp, and the moment shattered like glass. Wade pulled back first, clearing his throat, running a hand through his hair. "Should get some sleep," he said, voice unsteady in a way that didn't match his usual easy drawl. "Big day tomorrow. Car and all." "Right," I said, my own voice not much steadier. "Car and all." I climbed up to the loft that night with my whole body still humming, replaying the half-second before the coyote's howl over and over, wondering what would have happened if the night had stayed quiet just a little longer. I didn't know yet that tomorrow wasn't going to be the goodbye either of us thought it would be. I didn't know that the real trouble, the misunderstanding that would nearly cost us everything, was still 3 days off, waiting for us like weather building on the horizon. But that night, lying in the dark with the horses shifting below me and my heart still racing from almost, I let myself believe, just for a little while, that maybe I'd found something worth being brave for. The car wasn't fixed the next day. Wade found a second problem, a cracked hose he swore he hadn't seen before, and ordered the part from town, which meant 3 more days minimum. He told me this at breakfast with a carefully neutral face, like he was reporting the weather, but I caught the flicker underneath it, the same flicker I felt in my own chest. Relief dressed up as inconvenience. Terrible luck, I said, fighting to keep a straight face. Terrible, he agreed, not fighting at all. Then, quieter. You mind staying? I know it's not exactly what you signed up for. Wait, I've mucked stalls for you for 4 days. I think we're past the point of me minding. That earned me a real smile. Not the crooked almost smile he rationed out like it cost him something, but a full one, unguarded, the kind that made him look 10 years younger and made my chest ache in a way I was getting frighteningly used to. Good, he said. That's good. The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm that I've never quite managed to replicate with anyone since, no matter how hard I've tried. Mornings were chores. Feeding, mucking, mending fence line that never seemed to stop needing mending. Afternoons were riding lessons that had less and less to do with actual horsemanship and more to do with Wade finding excuses to stand close, to correct my grip with his hand over mine, to laugh. Really laugh, head back, unguarded, when I did something wrong in a particularly hopeless way. Evenings were the porch, the 2 beers, the conversations that went longer and deeper each night, peeling back a little more of both of us like we were taking turns being brave. I learned things about him in pieces, that his mother had died when he was 16, and that the ranch had been the thing that kept him upright afterward, the routine of it, the demand of living things needing him every single day whether he felt like getting up or not. That he'd left once, gone to Bozeman for 2 years to try city work, and hated it so completely he'd come home within 18 months and never left again. That his father loved him but had never once, not one time in 26 years, said the words out loud, and that Wade had made a kind of peace with that which still, some nights, didn't feel entirely peaceful. And I told him things too, things I hadn't told many people. About my own father, who'd made it very clear when I was 17 that a son who liked boys wasn't the son he'd planned on raising, and how that conversation had ended with me sleeping on a friend's couch for 4 months and had never really ended at all. Not really. Not in the part of me that still flinched sometimes at the word disappointed. About moving from job to job, city to city, always half looking for something I couldn't name, always coming up empty. About how exhausted I was, in a bone-deep way, of being careful. You don't have to be careful here, Wade said, the night I told him that. We were sitting closer than usual, close enough that his shoulder was a solid line of warmth against mine. Whatever that's worth. However long you're here, you don't have to be careful with me. That's a dangerous thing to tell someone, I said, only half joking. Maybe. He looked at me, steady, unflinching, in that way he had that made the whole world outside the 2 of us go quiet. Maybe I mean it anyway. The almost kiss came on the 6th night. We'd walked out to check on a mare that was close to foaling, lanterns swinging in our hands, the barn quiet except for the soft shift and huff of animals settling for the night. The mare was fine. Wade said probably another week yet. But neither of us moved to leave once we checked on her. We stood in the dim gold light instead, close together in the narrow aisle between stalls, and the air had that same thin, electric quality it had held on the porch 3 nights before. Eli, Wade said, and my name in his voice had started to feel like its own kind of touch. Yeah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get all the way through it before you say anything. Because if you stop me, I don't think I'll manage to start again. My heart was going so hard I could feel it in my throat. Okay, I whispered. I've spent 6 days telling myself this is just me being lonely. That any decent company after this long alone would feel like this. Like something I don't want to end. And I almost believed myself right up until this afternoon, when you laughed at something Bandit did and I realized I wasn't listening to a word you were saying anymore. I was just watching your face and I thought, I would give up an awful lot to keep watching that face for a long, long time. He stopped, throat working. I don't know what that makes me. I don't know what it makes either of us, or what happens when your car gets fixed and there's no reason left for you to stay. But I couldn't let another night go by without saying it, because I think I'd regret it worse than anything I've ever regretted. And I've regretted some things. I couldn't speak. My whole chest had gone tight and full at once. Some impossible combination of terror and joy that I'd never experienced together before that moment. Eli, he said again, softer now, and his hand came up, slow, giving me every chance to step back, which I did not take. and settled warm against my jaw, thumb resting just at the corner of my mouth. Can I? Yes, I said, before he'd even finished asking. God, yes. He leaned in. I felt his breath first, warm against my lips, felt the whole world narrow down to the 6 inches of space between us, felt every single day of careful, guarded loneliness rising up to meet this one impossible moment. And then his phone rang. Loud, jarring, absurd in the quiet of the barn. Wade jerked back like he'd been burned, fumbling it out of his pocket, and the screen lit up with a name that made his whole face change. Dad. I have to, he started. Go ahead, I said, my voice not quite steady, my whole body still leaning toward where his had been a second before. He answered it, stepped a few paces away, and I stood there in the lantern light with my heart still slamming and my lips still tingling from a kiss that hadn't happened, listening to Wade's half of a conversation that grew more tense with every word. Yeah, Dad. No, I know. I know that, Dad. It's complicated. No, there's nobody here. Just helping out a guy whose car broke down, that's all. That's all. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I told myself a man doesn't explain every detail of his life to his father over the phone. Doesn't have to. But something in the flat, careful way he'd said it. That's all settled cold in my stomach and stayed there long after he hung up, long after he apologized, long after we walked back to the house in a silence that had lost all its electric warmth and turned instead into something heavier, something neither of us knew quite how to lift. Everything okay? I asked once we were back at the porch steps. Yeah, Wade said, but he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Yeah, everything's fine. Just ranch stuff. Dad worries. I wanted to believe him. I wanted, more than almost anything, to close the 6 inches of space that had opened back up between us and finish what the phone call had interrupted. But something had shifted, and I could feel it the same way you can feel a change in weather before the sky actually turns. A stillness that means something is coming. Good night, Wade, I said finally, when it became clear the moment wasn't going to come back on its own. Night, Eli. He watched me climb the loft ladder, and just before I disappeared up into the dark, he said, quiet enough I almost missed it. For what it's worth. I meant every word. I lay awake a long time that night, turning that sentence over, weighing it against the coldness in his voice on the phone, trying to understand how both things could be true at once. I didn't know yet that I was about to find out exactly how complicated that's all could become. I didn't know that the next 3 days would be the hardest of the whole summer. That jealousy and misunderstanding were waiting just past the horizon, closer than either of us thought. Everything changed on the 8th day, and it changed because of a man named Dale. Dale Ferris ran the ranch 2 properties over, and he showed up mid-morning in a dust-covered truck with 2 cases of beer and the easy, familiar swagger of someone who'd known Wade his whole life. He was handsome in a loud, sun-worn way, broad-shouldered, quick to laugh, quicker to touch Wade's shoulder, his arm, the back of his neck in a manner that made something ugly and unfamiliar twist low in my stomach the very first time I saw it. Didn't know you had company, Dale said, looking me over with open curiosity when Wade introduced us. Car trouble, Wade said, which by then had become the explanation he reached for automatically, easily, and which by then had also started to feel like something smaller than the truth, worn thin from overuse. Well, hell, welcome to the neighborhood, Dale said, and clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to rock me back a step. This one's been a hermit for 2 years straight. Good to see him keeping company. We're just friends, Wade said too quickly, I thought, though maybe I only thought that because of the barn, because of the almost kiss still burning under my skin 2 days later, because of how badly I wanted it to have meant what it felt like it meant. Dale stayed most of the day. He and Wade had a history that ran deep: high school, a stretch of years working the same rodeo circuit, an easy shorthand of old jokes and shared memory that I had no way of matching, no way of even understanding half the time. I told myself I wasn't jealous. I told myself, repeatedly, that watching Dale sling his arm around Wade's shoulders and pull him into a rough, affectionate headlock over some old joke about a girl named Carly Whitfield from their junior year didn't mean anything. That old friends touched like that I had no claim on Wade's shoulders or his laughter or his attention. I told myself a lot of things that day. Most of them were lies. By evening, when Dale finally loaded back into his truck with a wave and a promise to come by again soon, something in me had curdled quiet and small and mean, and I couldn't shake it loose no matter how hard I tried. Wade found me in the barn afterward, checking on the mare more out of a need to be somewhere else than any real necessity. "You've been quiet," he said, leaning in the stall doorway. "Just tired." "Eli." He said my name the way he always did, low and certain, like it was a fact rather than a guess. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. You had a friend over." "That's nice. You seemed happy." I heard how flat my own voice sounded and hated it. Hated that I couldn't seem to stop it. Understanding dawned slow across his face, and then, infuriatingly, the corner of his mouth twitched like he was fighting off a smile. "You're jealous," he said. "I'm not jealous." "Eli, I don't have any right to be jealous," I snapped, and the words came out sharper and more honest than I meant them to. "That's the whole problem, isn't it? 2 nights ago we almost, and then your dad calls and it's nothing, just a guy whose car broke down, and today your friend shows up and we're just friends, and I don't know what I am to you, Wade, I don't know what any of this is, and I watched you laugh with him today the way you laugh with me, and I hated every second of it, and I have no right to hate it because you've never actually told me what this is." The words hung in the air between us. Too loud, too raw, too much all at once. Wade had gone very still. "You want to know what this is?" he said quietly. "Yes. Come here." I didn't move. My heart was pounding too hard. Some part of me terrified that I'd finally pushed too far, said too much, and that whatever fragile thing had been building between us these 8 days was about to collapse under the weight of my own ugly jealousy. "Eli." Softer this time. "Please." I went to him. He took my face in both hands, careful, deliberate, giving me every chance in the world to pull away. And this time there was no phone, no coyote, no interruption at all. "This is what it is," he said, and kissed me. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. It was slow and certain and warm, his hands gentle against my jaw, and I felt 8 days of careful, terrified longing finally break loose all at once. Felt myself lean into him like something coming home after a long time lost. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing unsteady, he rested his forehead against mine and let out a shaky laugh. "I've been wanting to do that since the second night," he admitted. "Almost did it that first morning with the coffee. Scared the hell out of myself." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I've never done this before," he said, and something vulnerable moved across his face. Something that cost him to say out loud. "Not with a man. Not ever. I've thought about it, hell, I've thought about it more than I've let myself admit, even to myself. But thinking about something and actually doing it, actually saying it out loud to another person, that's different. That's real. And where I come from, real is dangerous. Is that why you told your dad I was just a guy with a broken-down car?" He winced, and I felt bad for asking, but I needed to know. "Yeah," he admitted. "That's why. Not because I'm ashamed of you, Eli. I swear to God that's not it. I'm scared of him. Of what he'll say. Of the look he'll get on his face. The same look he got when my cousin Danny came out at a family Christmas 11 years ago, and my dad didn't say one word to him for 2 straight years." He shook his head. "I don't know how to be brave about this yet. I'm working on it. I promise you I'm working on it. But I need you to be patient with me, because I've spent 26 years building walls I didn't even know I was building, and you're the first person who's ever made me want to tear them down." I searched his face and found nothing but honesty there, raw and unguarded and true. Whatever ugly jealousy had been curdling in my chest all day dissolved into something softer, something that understood, because hadn't I built my own walls too, after my own father's disappointment? Hadn't I spent years being careful for exactly the same reasons? "Okay," I said. "I can be patient. Just don't make me a secret forever, Wade. I've been somebody's secret before. It's a lonely thing to be." "You won't be," he said, and kissed my forehead with a tenderness that undid me completely. "I promise you that. It's just going to take me a little time to figure out how to be brave out loud." We stood there a long while after that, wrapped around each other in the quiet dark of the barn, the mare shifting softly in her stall nearby, and for the first time since the storm that had brought me to his door, I let myself believe that whatever this was between us might actually have a future, that it might survive daylight, might survive his father's judgment, might survive the world outside this small warm circle of lantern light we'd built together. I was right to believe it. But I want to be honest with you because this isn't a story that pretends love is easy just because it's real. The hardest part, the part that nearly broke us both, was still 3 weeks away, and it had a name, and that name was Dale Ferris. 3 weeks passed like something out of a dream I was terrified to wake up from. My car sat fixed and full-tanked in the yard for most of those weeks, and neither of us said a word about it. I called in sick to a temp job I'd been about to start in Billings, told them a family emergency, and felt only a flicker of guilt about the lie, because the truth, I found something in a barn in the middle of a storm and I'm not ready to leave it, wasn't something I knew how to say out loud to a stranger on the phone. We fell into something that felt, for the first time in my adult life, like a real life. Mornings feeding stock together, hands brushing over feed buckets. Afternoons mending fence, Wade teaching me to swing a post driver properly while I got sunburned and useless, and he laughed at me in a way that had stopped being cruel days ago and become something closer to fond. Evenings on the porch that no longer ended in careful silence but in his arm around my shoulders, my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow and steady under my ear while the stars came out over land that felt, more each day, like it might actually be able to hold both of us. He was still careful in front of others. When Dale came around, which was often, sometimes with other ranch hands from the valley in tow, Wade's hand would find some reason to leave my shoulder, some reason to put a foot of distance between us that hadn't existed a moment before. I told myself I understood. I told myself patience was a thing I could keep giving, because what we had in private was so much realer, so much warmer, than anything I'd let myself hope for in years. But understanding something and feeling fine about it are two very different animals, and by the 3rd week, I was starting to feel the difference in a way I couldn't fully swallow down anymore. It came to a head on a Friday night when Dale showed up with 4 other hands and a cooler of beer for what he called an end-of-branding season get-together, out by the fire pit behind the equipment shed. I stood at the edge of the firelight most of the night, nursing a beer I didn't much want, watching Wade laugh easy and loose with men he'd known his whole life, watching him become, in front of them, someone slightly different than the man who held me on the porch every night. Looser with his laugh but tighter in his shoulders, funnier but somehow smaller, like he was folding some essential part of himself down small enough to fit into a shape these men would recognize. "You're that fella whose car broke down, right?" One of the hands asked me, not unkindly, just making conversation. "Guess you're still around." "Yeah," I said. "Still around. Wade's letting you stay a while, huh?" Dale's voice, coming up beside me. A knowing edge to it that made my stomach tighten. "That's not like him. Man doesn't let anybody stick around long. You must be something special." I didn't know what to say to that. Dale was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not unfriendly, but assessing, like he was working out a puzzle he hadn't quite solved yet. Across the fire, Wade caught my eye for just a second, and something in his face, a flicker of warning, of worry, told me he'd overheard, or guessed at, exactly what Dale was implying. Later that night, once everyone had cleared out and the fire had burned down to coals, I found Wade at the corral fence, alone, staring out at nothing. "You're quiet," I said, echoing his own words back to him from 3 weeks before. "Dale asked me something," Wade said, not turning around, "after you'd gone up to the barn. Asked me straight out if there was something going on between us." My heart stopped. "What did you say?" Wade was quiet for a long moment. "I told him no," he said finally. "I told him you were just staying till your car got fixed and you'd be moving on soon." The words hit me like a physical blow, worse somehow than anything I'd braced myself for. "It's fixed," I said, my voice coming out thin. "My car has been fixed for 3 weeks, Wade." "I know that. So why would you say I'd be moving on soon?" "Because I panicked," he said, and finally turned to face me. And even in the dim moonlight I could see how tired he looked, how strained. Because Dale looked at me like he already half knew the answer and I couldn't. I froze, Eli. I froze up and I said the easiest thing, and I hate myself for it. "I've been standing out here for 20 minutes hating myself for it." "You keep doing that," I said, and I could hear my own voice shaking, could feel 3 weeks of swallowed hurt rising up all at once. "You keep telling me I'm not a secret, and then the second someone actually asks, I become one anyway. Every single time. And I told you the first time this happened, I've been somebody's secret before, and it's a lonely thing to be, and I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being something you love in the dark and deny in the daylight. That's not. I deserve better than that. I know I deserve better than that. even if some old scared part of me isn't sure I do. Eli, I'm not trying to punish you, I said, softer now, because the anger had already burned itself down into something sadder, more exhausted. I understand you're scared. I understand your dad and Danny and 11 years of silence, and I understand that's not nothing. But I need you to understand something too. Every time you deny me to protect yourself, it costs me something. Costs me a little more each time. And I don't know how many more times I can afford to pay that price before there's nothing left of the part of me that believed this could actually work. Wade didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had gone rough in a way I'd never heard from him. I don't know how to be braver than I've been, he said. I want to. God, I want to. But every time I picture actually saying it, to Dale, to my dad, to this whole valley that's known me my entire life, something in my chest locks up so tight I can't breathe. I don't know how to explain that to you in a way that doesn't sound like an excuse, because I know it probably sounds like one anyway. It does, I said honestly, but I believe you that it's real. That doesn't mean I can keep living inside it. We stood there a long moment, the space between us feeling wider than it had any right to, wider than the 3 weeks of closeness should have allowed. Finally, I said the thing I'd been dreading saying since the words had first started forming somewhere in the back of my mind, days ago, when I'd first started noticing the pattern I couldn't unsee. I think I should go stay in town for a while, I said. Just give us both some space. Let you figure out what you actually want, without me standing right here making it feel urgent. Eli, don't. I'm not leaving you, Wade. My voice cracked on his name. I'm just leaving the barn. There's a difference. But I can't keep sitting in that loft every night wondering if tomorrow's the day someone asks the wrong question and you flinch again. I need you to want to be brave for me, not because I'm standing right in front of you making it hard to say no. He didn't argue further. I think some part of him even knew I was right, though it clearly cost him not to reach for me, not to try to talk me out of it the way every instinct in his body seemed to want to. I packed the small bag of things I'd accumulated over 3 weeks. A flannel shirt he'd given me that first cold week, a paperback novel I'd been slowly working through on quiet afternoons, and I drove into the small town of Larkspur that night with my chest hollowed out and aching in a way I hadn't felt since the last time my father had looked at me like I was a disappointment he hadn't asked for. I took a room above the diner, paid for by the week, and told myself it was the right decision even as every part of me wanted to turn the car around. The distance was its own kind of misery. I got a job waiting tables at the diner downstairs, mostly to keep busy, mostly to keep from lying in that small rented room replaying every moment of the last 3 weeks until I'd worn the memories smooth and thin from overuse. Larkspur was a small town, and word of a stranger sticking around got around fast, and more than once I caught someone giving me a curious look I couldn't quite place. Not unkind, just curious, the way small towns are curious about anything new. Wade didn't call. I hadn't expected him to, not really. I'd asked for space, and he was giving it to me with the same careful thoroughness he gave everything. And some nights that felt like exactly what I needed, and other nights it felt like confirmation of every fear I'd voiced at that corral fence. That he couldn't be brave. That some men simply weren't built for it. However much love sat underneath the fear. I saw him once, 9 days in, across the street outside the feed store, loading sacks into his truck bed with his jaw set tight and his eyes finding mine for just a second before dropping away. Neither of us crossed the street. I don't know which of us was more afraid to. It was Dale, of all people, who finally broke the silence. He came into the diner on a slow Tuesday afternoon, sliding into a booth by the window, and when I came to take his order he looked up at me with none of the easy joking I remembered from the ranch, just something quieter, more serious. "Sit down a second," he said. "If you got a minute." I sat, warily. "I've known Wade Calloway since we were 7 years old," Dale said, turning his coffee mug slowly on the table, an echo of Wade's own habit that made my chest ache. Watched him bury his mama at 16 and not cry once at the funeral, not once, and then go cry alone in the hayloft where he thought nobody could hear him. Watched him try city life and come home looking like something had been let out of a cage. I know that man about as well as anybody left alive knows him. He looked up at me, and I ain't seen him laugh the way he laughed those weeks you were staying out there. Not once, not in years. Not since before his mama passed, if I'm being honest. I didn't know what to say. "Dale, I don't think..." I asked him straight out if something was going on between you two. Dale continued, undeterred. And I want you to know I wasn't asking to cause trouble. I was asking because I love that man like a brother, and I've watched him fold himself smaller and smaller every year since his mama died. And for 3 weeks I watched him unfold a little, and then all of a sudden he's folded right back up again and won't say why, and I put 2 and 2 together and I figured it had something to do with the fella from the barn suddenly renting a room over the diner. My throat had gone tight. It's complicated, I managed. Most things worth having are. Dale's expression softened. Look, I don't much care what shape somebody's happiness takes, so long as it's real and it's kind and it's earned honestly. Never did. I've watched Wade Calloway be alone for 2 years straight. Watched him turn down every single person in this valley who ever showed the slightest interest, man or woman, and I always figured he just hadn't found the right one yet. Then you show up out of a storm, and 3 weeks later he's laughing like his mama's still alive to hear it, and then suddenly you're gone and he's not laughing at all anymore. He shrugged, standing to leave. I'm not saying it's my business. I'm saying that man's too scared to fight for something he wants, and maybe he needs somebody to remind him it's worth fighting for. That's all I came to say. He left a $5 tip on a $3 coffee and walked out, leaving me sitting alone in the booth with my heart pounding and something loosening in my chest that had been clenched tight for 9 long days. I didn't drive back out to the ranch that night. I wanted to, God, I wanted to, but some stubborn, wounded part of me held back, because Dale's words, however kind, weren't Wade's words, and I'd meant what I'd said at the corral fence. I needed Wade to choose bravery because he wanted it for himself, not because someone had talked him into it, and not because I'd shown up and made it easy to say yes in the moment without truly meaning it. So I waited, and 3 more days passed, each one heavier than the last, until the 4th day, a Saturday, when I looked up from wiping down the counter at the diner and saw Wade Calloway walking through the door in the middle of the lunch rush, still in his work clothes, dust on his boots like he'd driven straight in from the fields without stopping to change, and the whole diner went quiet the way small towns do when something is clearly about to happen. He walked straight up to the counter, ignoring the stares, ignoring everything, and stopped right in front of me with his heart plainly written all over his face. I told my dad, he said, no preamble at all, voice a little unsteady but not hiding, not folding down small the way I'd watched him do at the fire pit weeks before. This morning, told him about you, about us, told him I've never been happier than the 3 weeks you were staying in my barn, and that I've been miserable every single day since you left, and that if he couldn't accept that, then I guess we were going to have some distance in our relationship too, because I'm done choosing being small over being happy. The whole diner had gone still, listening, but Wade didn't so much as glance at any of it. His eyes locked entirely on mine. What did he say? I managed. He didn't say much of anything for a long while, Wade admitted. Just sat there at the kitchen table looking older than I've ever seen him look. And then he said, Wade's voice caught and I watched him push through it. He said he always figured something was different about the way I talked about you on the phone that night. Said he'd had 2 years to think about how he handled things with Danny, and he wasn't proud of it, and he didn't much want to make the same mistake twice with his own son. A shaky breath. He's not going to throw a parade about it, Eli. He's an old-fashioned man and he's going to need time. But he told me he'd rather have a son who's happy and different than a son who's alone and familiar, and that's about as close to I love you as that man's ever managed to get, and it's more than I ever thought I'd hear. My eyes had gone blurry, and I didn't even care that half the diner was watching. Wait, I'm not done, he said, and took a step closer, close enough now that I could see his hands were shaking. I know I hurt you. I know I made you feel small and hidden when you deserved better, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend those 3 weeks of you gone didn't happen, because they did, and they're on me, every one of them. But I love you, Eli Marsh. I think I've loved you since that first morning with the coffee, maybe since the second I saw you standing soaked in my doorway with nowhere else to go. And I am done. I am so done. Being scared of saying that out loud in front of anybody who might be listening. His voice broke on the last words. So I'm asking you, in front of God and Dale Ferris and half of Larkspur at lunch hour, to come home. Not to the barn loft this time. To the house. To me. However long it takes you to believe I mean it, I'll keep proving it every single day. For as long as you'll let me. I came around the counter without a word, because some things don't need words, and I kissed him right there in the middle of the diner with the lunch crowd watching and not one part of me caring. Because for the first time since that stormy night 3 weeks and 1 lifetime ago, I felt entirely, completely unashamedly seen. Somewhere behind us, I heard Dale let out a low whoop and someone else start clapping, and the whole diner dissolved into noise and warmth, and Wade laughed against my mouth. Really laughed, the sound of it vibrating through both of us, and I thought, with my whole chest full to bursting, there it is. That's the sound Dale meant. That's the sound of a man finally, fully unfolded. That was 2 years ago now. I live at the ranch full-time these days. My name's on the mailbox next to his, which took his father another 8 months to be fully comfortable with, but which happened eventually on a quiet Tuesday when the old man drove out just to fix the mailbox post himself and didn't say a word about why, just handed Wade the wrench when he was done and told him to keep the letters dry. Dale still comes around most weekends, cooler of beer in tow, and he never once lets Wade forget that he saw it coming before either of us did. The fire pit behind the equipment shed has become something like a regular gathering spot, and nobody there so much as blinks anymore when Wade's arm finds its way around my shoulders in front of the whole group, easy and unhidden, like it was always meant to be there. Some nights we still sit out on that same porch, same 2 mismatched mugs, watching the same endless sky turn gold and then purple and then full of stars, and Wade will turn to me sometimes, mid-silence, and say something like, "Still can't believe you got stuck out here in that storm," and I'll remind him every single time that I wasn't stuck. I was found. He asked me to marry him this past spring, out by the same corral fence where I'd once told him I couldn't keep being his secret. He didn't have a ring ready. He'd planned to, but couldn't wait, he said. Once the words started coming, he just had to let them out before he lost his nerve again. I said yes before he'd even finished the question. We're getting married in the fall, right there on the ranch under the same sky that watched the whole thing begin. I think about that stormy night more than you'd expect. About how close I came to just sitting in my dead car in the dark, too proud or too scared to walk those 2 miles to a porch light I could barely see through the rain. About how one small, desperate decision led me to a doorway, and a man standing in it, and a whole life I never once let myself imagine I was allowed to have. If you're out there tonight, cold and unsure and waiting for some storm of your own to pass, I hope you find your porch light too. I hope you find someone worth being brave for, and I hope, when the moment comes, you're brave enough to let them find you back. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It means more than you know and helps this channel keep telling stories like Eli and Wade's. Let me know in the comments. Whose side were you on during the distance, Eli's or Wade's? And if you want to hear more about their wedding day and everything that happens after, should I tell you what happened next? Yellow heart.
आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। मुस्कुरा के बात करती हो, आदतें खराब करती हो, ना दिखो बेताब लगता हूँ, आशिक बेहिसाब लगता हूँ। ऐसा नशा है तेरे दीदार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। जिंदगी हसीन लगती है जब ये जालिम प्यार होता है, सांसों में सांस आती है जब तेरा दीदार होता है। नखरा है ऐसा मेरी सरकार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। नखरा इसका टॉप पर, आती है टिकटॉक पर, नैनो से है नैन मिलाती, लड़कों के है दिल जलाती, पिंडी में है चर्चा इसका, नीरा जितना खर्चा इसका। मैंने बोला इसको मेट्रो में बिठाऊंगा, कैपिटल ले जाऊंगा, F7 भी घुमाऊंगा, मोनाल भी दिखाऊंगा, सेंटोरस भी ले जाऊंगा। आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार का। मौसमों की बेकरारी को आजमा के जान जाओगी, हिज्र की आजमाइश में एक दिन पहचान जाओगी। कहना है मेरे दिल बेकरार का, आशिक हूँ तेरा राजा बाजार का, लगता है मुझको नशा ये प्यार